Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download.
When the managers walk down the hall, they will cross a threshold in history, delivering articles of impeachment against the President of the United States for abuse of power and obstruction of the House. As we make that history, we will be making progress for the American people, progress in support of our Constitution, progress in honor of the sacrifice and the vision of our founders, progress in honor of the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, and progress for the future of our children. Make it be very clear that this president will be held accountable, that no one is above the law, and that no future president should ever entertain the idea that Article 2 says that he can do whatever he wants.
So that was just a couple of hours ago, live. We watched it happen on all the cable networks. I'm here with Dina Grayson, our good friend who knows the inside of Congress better than anybody else. What a moment today, Dina. I mean, that was really powerful to see Nancy Pelosi sign the articles, but also the entire ritual of them going over to the Senate, the managers handing over the articles of impeachment. Tell me more about your thoughts as you were watching that.
Well, it's a historic day, Zev, and it's a somber day. Obviously a part of me is relieved, I think is probably the right word, that Donald Trump is finally paying for his crimes against our country. He will be forever impeached, no matter how much the Republicans in the Senate try to cover up his crimes. So a somber day. And I don't think that anyone should be happy that this is happening to our country. But again, it's certainly a strong sense of relief that, justice is being delivered, and as well Trump deserves.
Absolutely. It's a powerful day that, you've worked tirelessly for, and many others. I should explain why I have a forest behind me. I'm in New York City for a change because I'm doing a lot of research and investigation on a big project we're working on. And so it's exciting to be here back in New York City, especially at this time when these articles of impeachment are being handed down. And, we have to just register the fact that the forest, by the way, is my friend's interior design, and I'm not commenting about it. I'm just thankful he's letting me use it. So thank you. So tomorrow, I guess the trial begins. The trial of Donald Trump begins. And, it's the first time he is going on trial. It's a significant event in his life because there's been plenty of opportunity before this for him to be on trial. But this is, truly historic. We've only seen this once before. Is that correct? Once before that we've seen a full trial. Twice or once? I can't remember.
Johnson there was a trial and he was acquitted by just a couple of votes, but long before the advent of live TV, let alone television.
Yeah.
So many years ago. So Andrew Johnson, certainly he was impeached and then again escaped a conviction, I believe, by a single vote in the Senate, if I recall correctly.
You're really good at this stuff. So a triumphant moment for Nancy Pelosi because she has been gambling on this. And she's a smart gambler because she knows what she's doing, obviously, because we wouldn't have gotten to this stage. Also a triumphant moment for the managers, which she announced today. It's interesting, the choice of managers, because it really was an event that, it was a selection of managers that was both geographically, racially, but also experience-wise very important. She's gone for people who are obviously skilled in being in courthouses and know their way around the judicial system. Explain that decision to me.
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't describe Speaker Pelosi as triumphant. This is something that she's really proceeded with, I think, cautiously, judiciously, and really understands the weight of impeachment.
Good point.
And, and having said that, she's a pro. I think that a lot of folks are claiming, I saw some headlines today that, Pelosi lost in this whole battle with Mitch McConnell. No, she didn't, because the heat is enormous on swing state senators. And I know we'll cover that later in the show, Zev. But with respect to the impeachment managers, it was an interesting list. I think there were some very obvious choices on there with both Chairman Adam Schiff and Chairman Nadler, who chair the respective intelligence and judiciary committees. And thank you for the helpful graphic. This is terrific. And then there were, Zoe Lofgren, who actually took part in the Nixon impeachment proceedings that led up to his resignation.
So
she was, I believe, like an aide back then.
Yeah.
She was around for the Clinton impeachment. So she's a veteran and a pro. And I think that she's going to be very valuable. And then some very talented litigators, and some newer, fresher faces to Congress, in Congresswoman Garcia, Congressman Crow, as well as Hakeem Jeffries, whom a lot of people know. And then I saved really kind of my favorite for last, which is my personal Congresswoman, Val Demings.
Right.
And anyone who's seen Val Demings, you don't mess with Congresswoman Demings. And I think she was an inspired choice. I think a great choice by the speaker. So I think there are some other folks I would have liked to have seen personally, and everyone has their own favorite. In addition to this great crop of litigators, I would have loved to have seen my adopted congressman, as I like to call him, Congressman Ted Lieu from California. So anybody who can recall him when he faced down Jeff Sessions, were you lying then? Were you lying now? I mean, he's a former JAG and is a veteran of the United States Air Force. And Congressman Lieu would have been he was kind of my stealthy favorite who didn't make it, but certainly some great names and faces that I think every American should be proud are representing us.
It would have been great to see Congressman Lieu there, but I think, the priorities must have been to get people from sort of the traditional red states, or at least the swing states. It looks like she's got that with Jason Crow. And I don't know very much about Sylvia Garcia. Do you know much about her?
A little bit about her, and her background. And I think, again, she'll be a good choice. She's from Texas, one of the newer members of Congress. So I think she'll be a great choice. But, Val Demings is from, my Congresswoman. Back to her, she's from a key swing state and has a long career in criminal justice here in Central Florida. So I think she's a terrific choice as well.
She's terrific.
She'll be great. And she knows how to make crooks squirm.
Yeah.
So
She doesn't take any prisoners. She's really, really fantastic. I really enjoy her testimony, her questioning, sorry. And then Jason Crow is also pretty impressive, I think. As a newcomer, he certainly has been able to stake a claim. Now, they've all been there for a while now. They're not so new anymore. But it's a good crop. They, I guess, take... when do they start? When do they start their proceedings? Tomorrow there's There's oaths that are administered to the senators, an oath book, I'm told, that they all have to sign in on.
Yeah, so I think we even have to back up. What happens tomorrow, my understanding, is, again, this is not the engrossment process, as we were discussing earlier today, and I had to familiarize with the sort of, fortunately for our country, we haven't impeached too many presidents.
Right.
So I had to familiarize myself with really some arcane and rather obscure, I should say, procedures, congressional procedures. So my understanding is that today the House sent a formal notification to the Senate that what they had done. Hey, guess what? We impeached Trump, in case you were like hiding under a rock for the last month. So then what happens is the Senate sends a message back. There's a lot of formality. I mean, the Congress does not operate in the digital era. They operate still back in the horse and buggy era, which there's some kind of, I think, some cool procedures, still here in history. I guess I should say tradition. So then the Senate will now send back a notification. Okay, yeah, we're ready to formally receive the articles of impeachment from the House. And then so tomorrow the impeachment managers will then walk over physically with the articles of impeachment to the other side of Congress and deliver them. So to me, that will certainly be a momentous occasion. And then, I think we know what happens from there, but
So the Chief Justice takes his place tomorrow. That's going to be interesting. And then I think they're installing television sets so people can see what's going on. That's not something they traditionally have on the Senate floor. And then this oath book and the oaths, that's going to be a very, I think, a jarring moment for people because, as someone mentioned, I was watching on TV earlier, these senators have sort of been observers like you and I of a process that's been going on in the House.
Oh, I would
Now,
say that some have been
yeah.
observers, Zeb, but I think part of the problem is that some have been, the Senate is a jury. That
Mhm.
is the key here, right? So Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice Roberts will actually serve as sort of the judge, the arbiter, but the actual jury here now is the Senate. And what has Mitch McConnell done? He is a crooked juror with a strong bias, and he is tainting, literally tainting, and God only knows what's happening behind the scenes, right, with
Mhm.
these swing state senators, of the promises that are being made for millions of dollars of help into their races. I mean, I,
Yeah.
this has certainly not been a fair and open process in the Senate, and
Now we
I
do have
think that
seen. It
that is
seems like
something
there's
that's
four votes
concerning.
that are going to be voting for at least the additional witnesses. So that's at least that looks like it's going to be the first battle, and it looks like that will happen. At least early
I
prognosticators
think
say.
that's right, and I think that all of us here, all of our viewers today here, Zev, on your
Mm,
show, your fabulous show, need to know that those phone calls, in particular targeting these key swing state Republicans, such
right.
as Susan Collins in Maine, in particular, who seems to be kind of the leader of this, I should say, reluctant group of um, cowards, to be
Well,
quite
she's playing
honest.
both sides for sure. I mean, she's got to be very careful. I can totally see how she's got to appeal to both sides, and she's got to look reluctant until when she
There's
votes.
only
But
one side here, Zeb,
yeah,
the side of truth and justice.
well, you
That
and
is
I know
it.
that.
It's very simple. It's very simple. If
But there's
there's
also
nothing to
politics
hide
at
and if the
play.
president did nothing wrong, then they should want the evidence out in the open. That's the reality here.
Right.
And instead, what we're seeing is the usual complicit Republicans involved directly in the cover up. And I think, well, you're used to these sort of dirty tricks when it's typical politics. But we're now in this, you would think that at least they'd kind of play the game and pretend, that they were going to be these impartial jurors. And I'm speaking when I
Yeah.
say they, in particular, the ringleader, Mitch McConnell. But he doesn't even bother to play the game.
He
It's a
certainly is
very
not.
sad statement.
Yeah. Look, I think the more evidence that's going to come out, and we already saw another dump of new evidence from Les Parnas today, and we'll go through some of the other stuff a little bit later on in the show. There is compelling evidence that's going to be coming out, and John Bolton testifying, all these other potential witnesses. It's going to make these guys look more and more foolish if they stay on this side of denying what seems to be
Well,
the obvious facts before them. It doesn't mean they'll,
Seb, you hit the nail on the head. But frankly, the Republicans have already crossed the Rubicon. Okay,
mm,
we had compelling evidence that Rudy Giuliani's, now this is Donald Trump's personal attorney, that Rudy Giuliani's Ukraine Gate henchmen conspired to spy on the ambassador. They had somebody, quote unquote, on the inside of the U.S. embassy in Kiev. They knew that whether or not her phone was on, her computer was on, if how many visitors she had, with whom she was speaking. And then there were these very menacing messages about how, well, you can get people in Ukraine. I'm paraphrasing here. You can get people in Ukraine to do anything for money if you pay the right price,
yeah.
essentially.
It seemed
LOL
very
is a response.
disturbing.
If Republicans won't stand up for public servants, these
Mm.
are nonpartisan public servants that are representing our country, and Ambassador Yovanovitch said, I felt threatened. That was before we saw
Well,
these
it seems like she was
frightening
threatened. I mean,
messages.
not there's good reason for it, and we'll go through some of that in a
Yes.
few minutes. But it is does so reminiscent to me of Nixon's plumbers and these guys who are sort of beyond the law and doing all these terrible, dirty tricks and threatening people. It's very reminiscent of that, and it's hard to shake that. Before we move on to the Parna stuff, I quickly wanted to take a look at the team for Donald Trump, which is defending him, Trump's defenders.
I'm
So
sorry. Can I try not to laugh? I mean, Jay Sekulow, you're
from
right
Jay
there.
Sekulow
This guy,
Live, it's a great show. Do you ever watch it?
how many like just criminal pots of money I mean, this guy is always hooking up with shady characters. He's kind of always arising. How many different kind of shady characters has he been interacting with, of kind of Trump's cronies? I
Oh,
mean,
so
the
many.
list is long and sorted. That I'm certain of.
Pat Cipollone, by the way, I was surprised, or not very surprised, I should say, to find out that he worked at Kirkland and Ellis, which is sort
No
of the
way.
place that Bill
Hashtag
Barr
shocker.
comes from, and the place where Alex Acosta comes from, and a few other people who are prominent in sort of these incredible defenses against
Wow.
congressional oversight. They all seem to come from one law firm because there are no others, it seems, on the Republican side. And then there's Pat Philbin and Michael Purpura, who are the deputies in the defense. I don't know very much about them, but I do know that Purpura has a specialty in basically battling congressional testimony. So that just tells you what we're all in for. These are professional lawyers, but they're not very accomplished lawyers, and they don't have much of a case to say. I should say, they've certainly testified before the Supreme Court and done some other major things, but they're not just sort of heavyweight lawyers.
Well, I got to tell you something. My money is on Adam Schiff.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he's going to bat leadoff. He's going to bat cleanup. I mean, everything. This guy knows the evidence. He has been an incredibly strong leader in the House of really fighting for truth and justice. And I think that the thing about Adam Schiff is he's unflappable. He's really he's a straight shooter. He's very clear and concise in the way he speaks, which I think is important, especially in the television era and soundbite era. But he's also just this very calm, rational guy. And he's not going to take any crap from these people. It's not
his first rodeo. He's done this before, so he knows what it feels like there. I mean, certainly not with the president of the United States, but he's done trials like this before, and his performance and the way they structured the testimony stage of this was phenomenal. I mean, they really were able to think in a TV narrative sense as well. They were able to roll it out for an audience so it was understandable, but also they had very few loose ends at the end of all of that, except for maybe Devin Nunes, and who knows where that'll land up. But they did a great job.
Another Uber ride, right?
Right. Oh, to where did he go? Libya and somewhere else, somewhere crazy. All right, so let's get into the Parnas stuff, because that's really interesting. And then I'll introduce a very special guest that we have on today. I got to show you this. Do you see this photo? I just couldn't believe
God.
it. So this is
it looks like something out of The Sopranos, doesn't it?
It
I mean,
does.
I thought it was actually from The Office at the Bing.
It really is
Jersey.
just unbelievable. I mean, look at these guys. The smoke-filled room. It's a lot, and it certainly tells you the kind of environment that these guys are in. And I'm bringing that up because the more you look into what Parnas iPhone has given us, all the evidence that he's given us, it does begin to look like there's a lot of mob connections. Now, there's one person that you and I both know and rely on. I rely on a lot for understanding what's going on, and that is Lincoln's Bible on Twitter. And we've managed to, if technology is helpful to me today, at least one of us can hear her at a time. So let's see if we can get Lincoln's Bible on to say hello. Are you there, Lincoln's Bible? Yay! Nice to hear your voice. I don't know if it's ever been heard, but it's good to have you on the air. I don't think Dina can hear you, so she said hello, and she's there. I'm going to ask her a couple of questions.
Actually, if you switch over the audio, I'll be able to hear her. So I won't speak, so I don't have the echo.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. What I'm going to do is this, and then what did you think of Parnas's evidence that came out of that phone yesterday, Lincoln's Bible? Tell us what your thoughts were.
Oh, well, first I want to say, hi, Dina. I can't hear you. And I appreciate the seriousness of which you started this show. And I haven't been heard before, but there is a level of seriousness that those texts brought into the conversation, and into our knowledge base of who we're really rolling with here with this president, that I felt the need to get on the air tonight with you when you asked. So
we're so thankful that you have, because honestly, there's very few people that I know who quite understand the story as well as you. And what I'd like to do is, you pointed to this online yesterday. You pointed to these two handwritten notes from the Ritz-Carlton. This is Parnas's handwritten notes. Basically, it looks like he's having a conversation with Rudy Giuliani, and he is, according to these notes, these are sort of his instructions, get Zelensky to, I don't even know what that's, to something that a Biden case
To announce that
the
the Biden case will be investigated.
Correct. And then
Start
also
communications with Zelensky.
without
I'm a
Pinchuk or
lefty. A
Colin.
doctor. I can
My,
read that writing.
you can, this is like a doctor's scroll. That's funny. But also to start communications with Zelensky without Pinchuk, I think, or Kolomoisky, who are the two oligarchs. And then there's the one on the right here where they're discussing Lenny Davis, who is the lawyer for Firtash. And I know this came to life to you, LB, because Firtash is, of course, a very prominent figure that is well known to be connected to the Russian mob. Tell us a little bit about what made these two pages stick out for you.
Well, it's sort of our followers, both for myself and other people who've been exposing the organized crime connections to Donald Trump and his history and giving all that context, have long been trying to point everyone to the fact that Manafort and Firtash are intimately connected. Mm-hmm. And so when I saw this, and also knowing that Giuliani was still consulting with Manafort, and knowing what Firtash's history is with Mogilevich, Dmitry Firtash is a upper lieutenant in the Mogilevich, Semyon Mogilevich, who is a Russian mafia boss. There's great speculation over how powerful he may be today, but rest assured, in his day, he was the brain inside of a transnational global crime syndicate of which there has been no rival in the last 100 years. So Firtash is
that's
his
a picture
lawyer.
of him, by the way, we're showing right now.
Okay,
He's
I'm a little behind you on what I can see. Yeah.
I'll just add a little bit of, well, so that people understand what they're looking at. So he's been referred to in proper intelligence community descriptions. They would describe him as this. He's considered to be one of the close associates of Semyon Mogilevich, as you said. He's who is the head of Russian organized crime, which is maybe not the most accurate description, but who's also Putin's best friend. Also may not be the most accurate description, but we get a sense that Firtash is very connected. He's currently has an extradition order against him to be extradited to the United States, but he's not following that. He's staying in Vienna. The extradition is for an $18.5 million payoff in India, but it is significant that he is wanted in the United States, and that part of what's been going on in the background here is that he has been resisting that, and of course electing Donald Trump and whoever else into government here is helpful to him, potentially, in fighting that extradition. But what you were also pointing out is how closely connected he is to Semyon Mogilevich. So I'm going to put up this chart, and then I'll let you talk a little bit, and then I'll run through some of this. I'm calling this Parnas's mobology, but at least people can get a sense of who Mogilevich is and some of the others on this board.
Okay, I haven't seen this. I'm not seeing it now, but let me clarify one thing. I know he's not Semyon's best friend. That particular honor goes to one of Fred Trump's old cronies and someone also connected with Giuliani and Donald and Michael Cohen. Mm-hmm. So that's a Brighton Beach kind of moniker I'd give out. Okay, now I'm seeing this. So we have, Pavel Fuchs, there he is. I'm sorry, I'm just catching up with this.
I can give you a little bit of an idea of why I ran it this way. So I had Parnas. I was looking for how is Parnas connected to Mogilevich? And there are two significant ways. One is a guy named Alexander Ungert, who now lives in London, who is supposedly a deputy of Mogilevich. And this is proven and factual. And Parnas has done some work for him. And the other way he's connected is through Firtash. There are text messages now that in the text messages that came out yesterday, where they spoke about Parnas traveling to Vienna, where Firtash lives, but he's also been a translator and worked for him before. And then if you look at, of course, Parnas is, we know, connected to Giuliani. He's tangentially connected to Donald Trump in that he's had photos. We don't have any evidence that there's any money changing hands between them in any contractual form. But we know that Parnas and Giuliani are connected and that they say they worked on Donald Trump's defense together for this. And then we also know that Pavel Fuchs is connected to both Giuliani and Trump, and as you mentioned earlier, Manafort. So when you look at this particular diagram, what you're seeing is that Donald Trump has three different, completely separate connections to Semyon Mogilevich, and that this particular branch is made easier to understand because of Lev Parnas's phone, which I think is this, when you look at a chart like this and you're saying, wow, there's three different paths to the dawn of dawns in Russia, that's pretty telling.
Right. I think it's important to point out that Mogilevich is actually Ukrainian and ended up in Russia, in Moscow, because of the Bratva that he is associated with.
Right.
And so we think of him, and this is important with Russian organized crime and thinking of that part of the global mafia, is that these connections, these individuals, many of them were in place when the Soviet Union was still intact. And so as the Soviet Union fell and the new states all sort of, came into being, the organized crime, the underworld, was still connected. And it was still connected in exactly the same way it had been, regardless of the politics above. This is important because, in this particular context, because Firtash and Mogilevich are connected through a company I can never pronounce correctly, but through the gas industry in Ukraine.
Energo or
Rus
something like that.
Ukrego, Energo. And that actually is the entity that was connected to Raiffeisen Bank, and that has been connected to quite a bit of not only money laundering abroad through Vienna, through all these other places that want Firtash in jail, but through Paul Manafort himself and through Fred Trump, Donald's father's fixer, a man by the name of Brad Zaxxon. So there's actually a lawsuit. Everyone can go and look up and see all their names together as defendants for a woman, which is important to point out, a woman named Yulia, and I cannot pronounce her last name either, but she was a cabinet member in the Yanukovych when he came into power, and he had a way with Paul Manafort at his side and Putin pulling the strings of putting people into prison, wrongfully imprisoning them. This is the corruption in the Ukraine that Donald Trump pretends he knew nothing about. It's also the corruption in the Ukraine that Joe Biden was acutely aware of, and was, when he was VP, saying, look, you've got to straighten this out because we had such corruption in there. So she filed a lawsuit for all of the wrongs that had happened to her. Her lawyer is an American lawyer, and they filed it through the U.S. courts. And everyone should take a look at that. You don't have to read more than a few pages of that, but understand and look in the defendants, that the co-defendants in that case are Paul Manafort, Semyon Mogilevich, Dmitry Firtash, and all of the laundering LLCs that he used for Mogilevich to launder the money from one scam to the next, and Brad Zaxxon, who was Fred Trump's fixer.
So this is, I'm going to bring in Dina back here because, this is so significant that what we're going to see over the next few weeks, I think, is evidence of Donald Trump's connections to the mob, the Russian mob and the Ukrainian mob. This is not just a case of him fighting corruption or not fighting corruption or moving ambassadors in and out of their positions. This is a case of him being involved in corruption himself and working on behalf of Ukrainian organized crime to make sure that corruption keeps going. It's a very significant turn, and it's very hard to see how senators are going to be able to look at all of this and not find him guilty.
Well, except
I'll leave that for Dina to chime in.
You never underestimate the corruption of Mitch McConnell and his Republican cronies, unfortunately. I mean, there's a reason that they got in line behind Trump when he became, their nominee back in 2016. So I think that what we unfortunately are looking at is that the Republicans will do their best to obfuscate, hide, lie, cheat, usual tactics, and in an effort to cover up Donald Trump's crimes.
Well, let me say that
the thing I will say is that I was at the Cohen hearing, Michael Cohen hearing live, as many of your viewers know.
Yeah.
I think the human emoji behind him, and
You're fantastic.
it literally was like being on the set of the Godfather movie, with the testimony of the mobsters before Congress. It was surreal, and anybody who wasn't aware, for whatever reason, of Donald Trump's long and deep ties to the mob, all you had to do was watch 5 minutes of that hearing, and it was blatantly obvious. And I'm very, I don't want to say happy, but it's about darn time that we start peeling back the layers of this onion, and everyone gets to see, that Donald Trump is a mopped up traitor, and he's been in bed with Ukrainians and Russians and the Iranians and a lot of bad,
Everybody, everyone, a lot of really bad elements around the world, and
certainly not pro-American folks and
not following the
entities.
rule of law, that's for sure, or any law. And that to me is incredibly significant. I wanted also to point out to you, LB, and to Dina here, in this particular notepad, it talks about Lenny Davis on the right hand side and getting rid of Lenny Davis. Nicely,
Yeah.
it says. Get all the
Nicely.
info,
Nicely.
whatever that
Not a
means.
hit.
What's the
Clarify.
Yeah,
alternative?
that's not a hit.
Yeah.
That's
And then it
Lenny.
says,
Why don't you go do something else now?
yeah. And then, so you know what's interesting is that I know where that came from, because here's Rudy Giuliani on I guess it's the 8th of March, 2019, criticizing Lenny Davis for saying that he's working for the Ukrainian oligarch Firtash, and that he needs to be exposed for that and be, basically criticize Lenny Davis for working for this indicted Ukrainian. So I think the reasoning behind all of that has to do with the fact that Lenny works for Michael Cohen and was part of Michael Cohen's testimony in front of the Congress. What are your thoughts about the role of this particular email, about this notepad, Lincoln's Bible, and this particular note about Lenny Davis?
I think here's what I think about Lanny Davis. I think Lanny Davis is a damn fine attorney for some very powerful and dangerous crooks, and I think it likely bothers the people who want to know the information but can't get their hands on information, that they can't get their hands on information of a lawyer that represented Michael Cohen. I think it is probably something in there that just drives the president nuts. And that, to me, that command was clearly coming, that get rid of this guy, get everything you can off of him, get all the info from the case. That's privileged information. If we're reading this correctly, I do now. I wasn't a big fan of hearing from Lev. I certainly don't want to hear from him over cable news without an oath. I want to hear from him under oath. But I'd like for him to explain some of this. And, there's some of these other names that look like they're difficult to understand. I can't even pronounce them. Are former Ukrainian, or presently Ukrainian competitors to Dmitry Firtash.
Yeah.
So this is all about Firtash.
Yeah, and Pitchuk and
It's all about
Kolomoisky.
Firtash.
Kolomoisky is a patron of, some people say, of Zelensky, but he has been at pains to say, when I think Giuliani and Parnas and Fruman came over to ask for the initial Zelensky meeting, Kolomoisky said, "Go ask him yourself. I do not talk for him," and shut that door. Which is why this note says, "Start your communication with Zelensky without either of these guys at your side," and that's it's a good sign that Zelensky might be an independent.
So Zeb, hey Zeb, I think one thing.
Let me just say one
one of
thing.
the things
Sorry, because you can't hear each other, by the way. So Dina was about to say something. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Sure. So I think one of the things that is important for everyone to understand and appreciate is that, and one of the things that gets confusing is when people think about Ukraine, they think of like a single entity and a united country. And in fact, Ukraine is challenged by the fact they have the former mother Russia right on its border, right, invading its land, as we all know, and that you have these entities within Ukraine that are very aligned with Russia. And this would be not just the mobligarch elements that we've talked about, Simeon Mogilevich, Dmitry Firtash, and others, but also some of the country's leaders. So when you think about the context of hearing, well, wait, wasn't Joe Biden trying to oust some sort of Ukrainian person? Well, yes, that was the corrupt former general prosecutor who was a Putin puppet and was appointed by the former president of Ukraine, who was another Putin puppet. So you have to. So I just want to caution our viewers that when you think Ukraine, you've got to understand which faction. Is this the pro-democracy, anti-corruption part of Ukraine, or is this the pro-Russia, corrupt mobligarch part of Ukraine?
Right. That's
and so if you're thinking about the mobligarch Ukrainians, mobligarchs, these are, they're in bed and leading the Russian mob. I mean, they're one and the same. They're all part of the same organization led by a Ukrainian guy who's now living in Russia, Semyon Mogilevich.
That's a
So I
very
think that's just
important
important for
distinction.
people to understand.
I think so too. I don't know if you could hear all of that at Lincoln's Bible, but if you could, what Dina was pointing to was the distinction between the mobbed up Ukrainians and the non-mobbed up Ukrainians, and that there's
Yeah.
a real difference between those two.
I'm switching back and forth. There's a little bit of a delay, but I am watching her. Yeah, she's 100% right. So let's just bring this back
Yeah.
and bring it down for a second. I truly don't care what kind of individual this guy Hyde ends up being in terms of his emotional, mental stability. He was playing around with the life of a U.S. ambassador abroad in return for his sycophantic closeness and connectedness to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's personal attorney appeared to have, via the relationship with Lev Parnas, taken this man seriously.
Yep.
I do not care who he is. Everyone needs to get on this page. This looks like definitely the tracking and stalking of a U.S. ambassador was sanctioned, was known, and apparently, I don't know, requested, but certainly no one's saying, stop, don't do that.
And it gets very tricky when they're talking about, whatever the price might be. I mean, are they actually talking about something or doing harm to the ambassador? It's certainly...
Yeah, well, yes. And again, this guy would be, a fantasist poser. Unfortunately, there are a lot of those. I'm gathering they're in the spy world as much as they are in the organized crime world.
Right.
Of men mainly who like to sort of have a grandiose sense of themselves or selling themselves that way in order to get access to power or favor. So he could be in that camp. Again, it does not matter. Look at what they were discussing.
Yeah. It is
Look
shocking.
at what they were discussing.
You know what? Even
and
just
the
once,
fact that when you get into this world, let me just say this: when you get into this world, and you are either studying it, or you're investigating it, or you're prosecuting it, or God forbid, you're sucked into the underworld, and you're a member of it. The human life, our bodies, mean nothing. So yes. Would they be discussing flippantly to commit an act of violence on a U.S. ambassador? Sure, that's the world.
Well,
and
Dina,
Dina wanted to
I
jump
take a
in here.
step
Let's
back.
just hear. Dina, go ahead.
Yeah, I take a step back, LB. I 1,000% agree with you, but I even think let's just look at the absolute facts that are clear, right? You had Trump cronies via his own personal attorney conspiring with foreign elements to surveil a sitting U.S. ambassador inside a U.S. embassy.
Yeah.
Right there, what did Pompeo know and when did he know it? This is, embassy security is something that is critical. We've had ambassador killed recently. Remember Benghazi. Where was the State Department on this?
It's a good question.
Why
because,
was she was yanked out in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
Get on the next plane. That is frightening. These are facts. So you don't even have to look at the text messages to know that happened. Now we learned that they were surveilling her enough to know if her telephone is on. This is very, very, very concerning.
And potentially had someone inside. It's
impossible to imagine any honest intent of what they were doing while breaking the law. But even without knowing what they were going to do with it, it is chilling.
100%. I think, and when he says that there's someone on the inside, I mean, how terrifying for the ambassador to find out that there was someone around her leaking information about her that could have caused her enormous amount of harm, but certainly was leaking a lot of sensitive information about her,
where she was,
what her
security detail was.
Unbelievable.
That is frightening.
when you talk about national security threats, and when Nancy Pelosi keeps underlining why this impeachment is about national security, this is why. I mean, ambassadors are
All roads
ambassadors.
lead to Putin.
Yeah, all roads lead to Putin. We should probably come to a close soon, but let me point to two more things that Parnas said, which I think are interesting. Firstly, we mentioned Vienna. Where are you guys going to Vienna? Well, that's where Firtash lives. Wow, says Rudy Giuliani. I mean, that's interesting and telling about who they were getting instructions from. And the other one, which I know Lincoln's Bible you'll appreciate, landing in Teterboro around 4 p.m. Oh, we lost Dina there. For meeting at the Grand Hyatt at 5 o'clock. And then he says, I have a meeting there from 5 to 7 p.m., then free. Now, you and I both know, Lincoln's Bible, that the Grand Havana is a place where the Russian mob likes to hang out.
I'm sorry. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's blatant. All of the pieces are there. They're not even under the surface. There's no surface to scratch.
Mm-hmm.
It's so present that that this is organized crime, that it's just floating around all of us. And I get that people have a hard time wrapping their minds around it. I really do.
I don't know why
chilling.
people will have such a hard time, because I feel like the evidence is now there, and now is probably the time that people should become more familiar with who these people are on this chart, because these guys don't mean well for the United States. And if the President of the United States has direct dealings with, or indirect dealings with Mogilevich, to the extent that he appears to be through three different, if you were playing 6 degrees of separation, he's at 2 or 3 degrees in 3 different ways to Mogilevich. It's disturbing, and it needs to be looked at. And now is about the time that Americans need to face this truth, because at the end of the day, Donald Trump can stay in power after this, can be reelected, but are we willing to accept that he is so mobbed up as we reelect him, or potentially reelect him?
Yeah. I don't know.
You're avoiding the politics of this kid.
I am. I'm not. It's a weird statement to make, but I'm not a very political person.
No, I understand that. Yeah.
I'm just not. But the darkness is rising.
Yeah.
The underworld is flooding us, and anyone who knows anything about it and has looked at organized crime from any angle knows it.
Right.
And we're either going to choose to stand up to that and choose our republic, or we're not. And it's that simple.
Right. This is much more than about the
I encourage
parties.
journalists to not back off of it. There's so many great journalists out there doing a lot of hard work. And I know that I know the whole rigmarole with the attorneys and, getting through the process of trying to get your story out. I get it. But just don't stop. Don't stop. Everything's on the line.
I know Dina's trying to get back on the line here. We lost her briefly. If you can hear me, of course, Dina, I hope. I can't see your video as you reconnect, so you're going to have to try one more time. And let's see if we get to see you. There you are. Let me pull you back up here. Sorry, this is not my usual studio, so I'm learning. Dina, can you hear me?
I can hear you. My apologies.
I'm sorry. It's probably my fault. I've got a whole new system that I had to set up here in New York, and trying to get all this together took a little bit of time.
You're doing awesome.
Yeah. Well, we're almost done, because I know everyone's got to sort of step out and live their lives. But I don't know if you heard that last part where we were talking about the amount of darkness, as LB was putting it, that seems to be rising in this world and swamping out the people who want the rule of law, and how important it is that people start to realize that is what is at stake right now.
I totally agree with LB. And the reality is that global criminal networks don't like law enforcement. They don't like the rule of law. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I have a bad echo again.
No worries. I'll try to
hey, thanks. And so their whole motive, right, is to do exactly what Donald Trump is doing. He installed his ringer as the attorney general. I mean, we thought that Jefferson Beauregard Sessions was bad, but actually he was pretty decent compared to Bill Barr, who is devious and worse than a sycophant. He's just morally corrupt and is part of the active cover-up of Donald Trump's crimes and those of his cronies. So, it is a very frightening time, not just here, but you look in Western Europe and countries that are actively under attack by Putin, who is clearly and obviously in bed with the global mob and is certainly doing their bidding. And as is, unfortunately, the President of the United States, which is something I never, ever thought in a million years I would believe for a moment, let alone say publicly, but this is where we're at. And people need to see the truth for what it is.
I will also say that every day that it continues, it gets worse. It gets harder to reverse this. It's like the analogy about the scrambled egg. Unscrambling an egg is really hard. But it's very hard to turn back rights when they've been turned off, and people get sort of numbed and used to the idea that this is the way things are now. So
I think people are motivated, Zev. I mean, I think the elections of 2018 and 2019 show. We usually Democrats do not perform well in off-year non-presidential elections, especially something like 2019. My goodness. And Democrats have done extremely well in election after election in very, very, very red places. So I actually think that luckily, we still have that open right to vote, and Americans must exercise it in November. I mean, vote literally like the future of our country depends upon it, because guess what, friends? It does. Vote. Get your friends to vote. Get your friends to vote. Everyone needs to vote, and that will hold up. And I think that there, hopefully will be an end to this national nightmare very soon.
Absolutely. A good way to end the show. I'm going to ask Lincoln's Bible to say one last thing as we close the show. Lincoln's Bible.
I think it's important to, as much as the folks that follow us really carefully, to people who maybe are just coming into this conversation newly and a little bit rocked by it, and for all of us to just for us to keep an open mind as well as we go into this Senate trial. I know folks want to just write off a whole party of senators as being irreversibly and irrevocably corrupted and compromised. But let's keep our minds open for them. So there's a space for them maybe to walk onto the right side of history and the rule of law. And I think just pay attention to every little detail is what I would say. There's no detail too small.
Absolutely.
And don't lose hope, friends. Don't lose hope, because that's then they win.
That's it.
And over the next 2 weeks, pay the attention to detail is important, because it's going to be a short trial. We have a lot of people who focused very carefully on this. Don't let anything slip by. Research everything. But even more importantly, this is when public opinion matters. The more public opinion polls rise, the more influence that is brought to bear on the senators, especially the senators in the swing states.
Phone calls.
Phone calls.
Phone calls are the most influential. Written snail mail letters and phone calls. Tweets don't do it.
Yeah.
Because what you want to do is you want to annoy the staff, because then the senator will hear about it. Because if you flood those offices with phone calls, trust me, as somebody who knows this, that congresswoman, congressman, senator will hear about it.
So this is no time to sit back. This is a time to take action. It's only a few weeks, and if we can do this now. If we can give this real push right now to get the Republican senators, especially the ones that are on the bubble, really, really thinking about what their constituents really want. And if we can get that action going, there'll be a potential here that you can move some of those votes. We've already seen 4 senators who look like they're going to vote for witnesses. Those 4 are on the bubble, but there's probably more who are thinking, this is their time in history, and they should do the right thing. I'm going to end there because I could talk to you guys forever because you're two of my absolute favorite people, and I hope everyone got as much out of this as I did, and to you too. And thank you very much, Lincoln's Bible. It's nice to hear your voice, and I hope we get to hear it again. This has been a fun and interesting Narrative Live. Maybe fun is not the most accurate term, but it certainly has been interesting. And we'll do it again in the near future. I'll be on the road for a while, so hopefully it'll be an easier setup next time. But have a good night, and thanks very much for joining us here on Narrative Live tonight.
Thanks for having me, Zev.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dina.